Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the December 12th meeting of the Planning Commission. If you would all please join me in the salute to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Cannon.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Nader.
Here.
Mr. Hauge.
Here.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Here.
And Mr. Herzog is absent.
Report from our planning director. Good morning, EJ.
Technology, always my favorite. Good morning. This is it, our last meeting of the year. We made it. It's been a very long but very productive year. Sorry I missed you at the last meeting, but I understand you had good weather going up to Tahoe, so that's always a plus, and always good to make sure everybody's got safe travels up there. As most of you probably heard, this past Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors approved the Sunset Area Plan, Placer Ranch specific plan. That took over 7 hours, so it was a very lengthy hearing. Lots of passionate testimony from both the public and also the board members regarding the history of that project. With that approval, the one thing they did not change was the one recommendation that the Commission had regarding allowing existing residential uses to remain in the entertainment mixed-use zone district. That part was not carried over in their action. The board's position was that most of the existing developed properties have existing vested entitlements, and the allowances provided in the non-conforming use section of the zoning ordinance already protects such uses. So in some respect, they thought it was redundant, might be confusing in interpreting the plan down the road. And they thought those uses out there already had protected rights. So anyway, so that was the primary item on that board agenda. Looking out into next year, Planning Commission schedule, January 9th is our first meeting. We're going to do that here in Auburn, but we're going to do a live feed up to our Tahoe office because we will have the continued Schaefer's Mill project on that agenda. And there's also an extension of time that is a Tahoe project. So we'll have the opportunity for the public to speak will be both in Tahoe and Auburn on January 9th. And then and the schedule continues January 23rd. We'll have a full agenda as well as February 13th. Two of the big items that are going to be coming early next year, the winery and farm brewery ordinance, and then also the Placer County Conservation Plan. So that will probably highlight the first part of the year.
You don't have a date on this
yet? I don't have a date. We're looking, it'll be late January into February for both of those, or possibly later, depending on how things come together.
So at this point, January 23rd, you do not know exactly.
I do not know. We were shooting to have the winery ordinance on there, but right now, most likely it will be the first meeting in February. That's all I have.
Same day.
Any questions? All right, we'll get started.
Thank you. Now it's time for public comment. This would be anybody wishing to address the commission on items that are not on today's agenda. Is there anybody wanting to speak? Seeing none, we'll close that portion and move on to the consent agenda.
Recommend approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Quick note to offer public comment on the consent agenda before the motion.
Pardon? Oh, is there anybody in the public who would like anything removed from the consent agenda and dealt with on a separate basis? See none, so we'll back to the motion, and thank you for keeping me out of trouble, Council. So we have a motion and a second?
A motion for Mr. Hauge, a second for Mr. Cannon, so a vote for Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Nader,
Yes.
Mr. Hauge,
Yes.
Mr. Sevison,
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Thank you.
We are actually past 10:05, so we are good to start with item number 1.
Good morning, Commission members. My name is Ben Bart Auction, Deputy County Surveyor and Supervisor in charge of addressing services. Today I bring for you a request for application to change route name from Pear Drive to Precision Place. This is the map of the area that shows Pear Drive, south of Kemper Road, west of Highway 49, west of Industrial, and east of Kemper Oaks Court. A bit of a background. In July 2019, application was received to Addressing Services to change the route name from Pear Drive to Precision Place. The application was deemed appropriate as coming from an owner addressed on the route. Addressing Services vetted the proposed name with first responders, fire, and post office, and addressing for any conflicts in the area. Finding no conflicts, addressing proceeded with the balloting of the parcel owners addressed on or fronting the road, seeking feedback on the name change. After balloting and receiving appropriately 2/3 majority in favor, formal process began to change the road name and informed the applicant of the results. In continuation with the background, the request for approval was presented to the MAC on November 12th and received 7-0 in favor of recommending to approve the route name. The proposed changes will affect 7 parcels. 4 of those parcels are currently not addressed. 3 of those parcels are currently addressed and will change the road name they use. Only the route name changes, the address numbers will remain the same. The total cost for the county is $200 to replace the 2 signs located on the public road. A bit of a information for you is the process to change a road name. First, the application is submitted by a property owner fronting on the route. The vetting of the proposed name to make sure there's no conflicts with the existing road names. Once the vetting is complete, ballots would be sent to parcel owners fronting on or addressed off that route. Within a reasonable period, the 2/3 majority of the received ballots must be cast in favor of the route name change in order to move forward. At that time, we informed the applicant of the successful ballots received.
Excuse me, how many property owners are on that street, did you say?
There are 7.
7, and how many ballots did you receive?
We received 4 in favor. Yeah.
Okay, so 3 out of 4 were...
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So to continue with the process, it is a 3-stage process: presenting to the MAC, requesting a recommendation of approval, presenting to the Planning Commission, requesting a recommendation to the board, and presenting to the board, requesting approval of the change. If approved by the board, the process will begin to implement the change. That includes sending letters to the affected property owners, indicating the timeline for the change, typically 30 days out, notifying the first responders of the effective change and the date of that effective change, updating our permitting system, the county GIS, and then performing the field work to change the actual road signs at the 2 locations in this case. With that, we're requesting the Planning Commission finds this application exempt from CEQA and request the approval of the application to change the name from Pear Drive to Precision Place. With that, that concludes my presentation. Open for any questions.
Questions? No? I just electronically, how do they get, like, I don't know, Google Maps and the Garmin, how do those get updated, you know? Do we send something to
We
them?
don't send anything out. We update our GIS and our internal permitting system. As I understand, periodically those service providers will do a grab of the current names in the system so that they can populate their own wayfinding software.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to get up and speak? Apparently not here or not wanting to. Oh, here it comes. Okay. You don't have to, by all means.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The applicant would just like to thank you for your consideration and also to thank the county for all the efforts as we're building this project, putting jobs. And the name reflects what we feel about our people and our 140 employees and the craftsmen that they are. And again, we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Karen Nichols, and I'm a resident off of Pear Drive. Pear Drive is a 160-foot stretch of your county road and mine that enters into Kemper Oaks Court, which is a subdivision that we've lived in since 2001 when John Haldeman built it. We had a part of our needs. We lived out in a rural area of Auburn from 1987 until that 2001 period when we had a son who was born with disabilities. And we wanted to be accessible to what is a rare thing in Auburn, public transportation and service, restaurants and things like that that he could access walking since he will never drive. So it was a unique find for us, and we've been very fortunate to have lived there. We believe in creative placemaking. We believe that a place has a feeling. And Kemper Oaks Court has very much been that. As the building has gone, VN has been very responsive once we found out about the project, because we were not notified originally of this project, that it was going on. They've been very accommodating and very neighborly in many, many ways, many times post decisions. And they've been working very hard with us to mitigate those things that have happened on our block. I would just say that where we are right now is that we still believe that place matters. We have young families moving into our area. That is 160 feet that needs to be a safety health zone for us coming and going, and continue to have the importance of placemaking as a community that we have. Access, while at the same time community, a sense of place. Zoning matters. I know that we look at zoning and we look at those areas that are particularly tough, right? And I know that you know a whole lot more about that than I do. But when I come off of Kemper Oaks Court and use that 160-foot stretch of Pear Drive, it is, by its nature and its name, residential. And because of that, I, as a parent, as a new grandparent, I'm now 3 this last year, know that that 160 feet is a health and safety zone. I want to just name a couple of places in Auburn nearby. Let's see, how do you drive in Auburn on Industrial Drive versus Wildberry Lane? How do you drive on Plaza Way versus Gateway Court? And how are we going to drive with increased traffic, large vehicles on Pear Drive versus Precision Place, just a block down from Industrial? I would submit to you, it's going to be different. And I don't mind change. My life has tested me in regard to change. And I'm willing to have change. And the VNs are willing to work with us on that. But in this case, I have to come before you and say, Pear Drive and Precision Place, and the zone that they are in, that fine line between residential and commercial industrial, is a line I want you to walk very carefully. Thank you. I'd ask that the signage be considered there. That road out of Vivian Enterprises has the right-of-way. It's going to be difficult for us to get out safely. The view is not very well to get out. So would you consider that as well as the name change very carefully? Thank you.
Is there anyone else wanting to speak? I'm seeing none. So we'll close off the public comment and bring it back to the commission.
Ben, would you mind putting the recommendation back up? Yes, please.
And this is a recommendation to approve the application.
They're recommended to the board. Unless there's no discussion, I'll go ahead and make a motion before we go with this. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors to find the project categorically exempt of environmental review pursuant to Section 15061, D3 of CEQA guidelines, and Section 0.08.020 of the Placer County Environmental Review Ordinance. Is there anything else I need to say? Oh, you want to handle those together or separately?
Those can be taken together.
Okay. And further move that we change the name of Fair Drive to Precision Place.
A motion. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please, Sue.
I have a first from Mr. Nader, a second by Mr. Cannon. So a vote from Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison. Yes. Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Thank you.
Morning, Chris.
Ready? Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Chris Schmidt with the Planning Services Division. The item before you today is no action requested, but we're here to take public comment on the draft environmental impact report for the Brady Vineyard subdivision. The project's being proposed by Cook Development Consulting Services, and the project's in West Placer. So today's hearing, the state recommends or encourages municipalities to hold hearings on the draft EIRs. It's not required, but it is county policy that we do have a public hearing before the Planning Commission on draft EIRs. The Planning Commission later this spring will be making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the merits of the project and the final EIR and the required entitlements for the proposal. This hearing is to review the adequacy of the draft EIR. It's not an opportunity to debate the merits of the project. So we're looking for feedback on have all the impacts been considered and have them been properly mitigated. Today's hearing was noticed to property owners within 300 feet of the project boundaries, so 59 total owners. Anyone who had commented on the notice of preparation that was done earlier this year, that's 25 people. Copies of the draft EIR were provided to the Roseville and Rockland Public Libraries. I want to point out on the agenda, we listed some other libraries, Colfax, Auburn, and Lincoln, as receiving the document, but that was not the case. It's just the Roseville and Rockland Public Libraries. Copies were also provided at the front counter here in the Cedar Building and at the county clerk's offices. Notice was provided to the West Placer MAC. Legal notice was placed in the Sacramento Bee. The notice was provided to state and federal agencies, other public agencies and school districts, and also county staff. So the project site itself is located at the northwest corner of Brady Lane and Vineyard Road. There's an aerial of the project site, mostly vacant. There is a drainage that flows to Dry Creek to the south on the western border. The project site is 35 acres. There is a 2-acre privately owned parcel that this project wraps around. This does not change the entitlements for that property. Some photos. The photo on the left is looking north along Brady Lane, and the one on the south is looking west along Vineyard. The one on the top is kind of looking across the site, not many trees, mostly grassland. And the second photo is the drainage on the western boundary of the project site. So the project itself, it will be a minor land division to create a 3-acre, not part of this subdivision parcel. No entitlements being sought for that 3 acres. The subdivision itself is 119 single-family detached homes, a gated entryway along Brady Lane, emergency vehicle access along Vineyard, a sewer lift station required to service the project and also the surrounding area, 1.4 acres of landscape area maintained by the Homeowners Association, private park land of 1.25 acres, and then restricted open space, which is the drainage corridor of 5.09 acres. A 1/3 mile public trail along that open space area, and total open space of 22% on the project site. The project's been designed in 2 villages. The northwest village has smaller lots, 5,000 to 8,600 square feet, average size of 5,600 square feet. And then the lots in the southeast village near existing development, 39 lots, 6,600 to 11,538 square feet, 7,600 square foot average. There's some off-site work required. Sewer would be extended along Vineyard Road to existing sewer in Foothills Boulevard, and then some frontage improvements along both Vineyard and Brady Lane. A suite of entitlements, including a general plan, community plan amendment to change the land use designation from low density residential and rural low density residential to medium density residential and open space, rezone for residential single family, combining agriculture, minimum building site of 20,000 square feet, open space, and farm development reserve to residential single family, minimum building site of 4,000 square feet, and also open space. The subdivision map for the subdivision of the 35-acre site into 119 lot residential single family subdivision, a conditional use permit to allow a top lot within the open space area, a variance to increase allowable building coverage on residential lots from maximum 40% to 50% for 1-story units only, and then the minor boundary line adjustment to create that 3-acre, not a part of the subdivision parcel in this southwest corner of the site. So this project does propose a community plan amendment and a rezoning to increase density. Therefore, it is bound to comply with the county's requirement of 10% affordable units. This can be built on or off-site, pay an in lieu fee, or the applicant can propose a comparable affordable housing measure acceptable to the county. So in the EIR, we analyzed 3 potential build-on-site options, constructing and de-restricting 12 individual units as affordable, constructing a primary dwelling along with an accessory dwelling unit on 6 of the lots, and de-restricting all 12 of those units as affordable, along with option B, allowing 6 other buyers to construct a primary dwelling and accessory dwelling unit. These additional 6 units will not be required to be deed-restricted. So since this menu of options is available, we decided to analyze the potential in the draft EIR for that build-on-site options. So there's a potential for 119 primary units and also 12 ADUs. The timeline for the project, the NOP was published January 30th of this year. That comment period lasted through February 28th, 2019. We had a public scoping meeting here in this building on February 21st, 2019 to receive public comment, and the draft EIR was released for public comment on November 20th of this year. A whole bunch of environmental areas are analyzed in the EIR. Less than significant impacts, so these environmental issues, there were no impacts and no mitigation measures for hazardous and hazardous materials, land use and agricultural resources, public services and recreation, and also utilities and service systems. The major impact for this project is traffic. It has impacts on 3 area intersections. The mitigation to the traffic impact on Vineyard and Brady Lane is a 1-lane roundabout, 3 spokes on that roundabout. At Cookerillo Road and Vineyard Road, the mitigation measure calls for a 2-lane roundabout. And then at Brady Lane and Baseline Road, either a signal or turn restrictions. So northbound off of Brady wouldn't be able to make a left turn lane onto Baseline Road. And also from Baseline Road, you wouldn't be able to make a left turn lane into Brady Lane if you're heading westbound on Baseline. So these intersections do remain significant and unavoidable. So for existing plus project, Baseline Road, Brady Lane intersection is significant and unavoidable because this intersection is controlled by the City of Roseville. So those improvements, that signal or turn restriction, can't be guaranteed, so it's significant and unavoidable. And then under cumulative, impacts at Baseline Road, Brady Lane, Cookerillo, Vineyard Road, the 2 roundabouts, then also Vineyard Road, Brady Lane intersections would be significant. So Baseline Road, Brady Lane, the community plan talks about a roundabout there, but this project's not in the CIP, so we can't guarantee it would get constructed. For Cookerillo and Vineyard, this measure, there's a roundabout proposed for that intersection, but it only calls for 1-lane roundabout, not the 2 lanes. So therefore, these improvements can't be guaranteed. So they are significant and unavoidable. The EIR does look at 3 alternatives: a no project, no build alternative, an existing community plan alternative, and a reduced density alternative. The existing community plan alternative would result in 30 lots and 8.6 acres of open space. The reduced density plan would consist of 83 lots and 10.9 acres of open space. It would also require a community plan amendment and rezoning, so it would trigger affordable housing for this alternative. And then SEQRA requires that an environmentally superior alternative be identified. Since implementation of the no project alternative would result in fewer adverse environmental impacts, this alternative would be considered the environmentally superior alternative. However, the no project alternative does not achieve any of the project objectives. Build out pursuant to existing community plan alternative would result in greater or similar impacts compared to the proposed project. But failure to proceed with the proposed projects would not necessarily result in preservation of the existing environmental conditions that you see out there today. It would rather result in the future build out of the site pursuant to existing county planning documents, and this also qualifies as another type of no project alternative. So neither of those 2 alternatives can be considered the environmentally superior. Therefore, the reduced density alternative is the superior alternative to the proposed project. So besides at today's public hearing on the draft EIR, there will be opportunity for public input on the project. This draft EIR does circulate through January 3rd, 2020. So public comment can be submitted in writing to the county. Any person who submits a written comment or an oral comment on the draft EIR will receive a formal response to their comments and a copy of the final EIR. We'll also be going to West Placer MAC as an action item, likely later this winter, so February or so. Planning Commission would be considering a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. We're looking at early spring. And then a Board of Supervisors entitlement hearing would be in the spring. And with that, I can answer any questions, or we can open up for public comment on the EIR.
A question. Why isn't the county going out to the City of Roseville and getting a commitment for those mitigation measures so this project could go forward as a project that mitigates the impacts?
Want to answer that?
Hi, good morning. Lee Chavez for the record. The City of Roseville, to my knowledge, is aware of the necessary mitigation measures. They were part of the outreach, and they are in support, I believe, of the mitigation measures, but ultimately, we don't control whether the measures are implemented or not. Therefore, we have to call it significant and unavoidable.
I understand that, but I'm looking What about an agreement with the City of Roseville to?
Oh, like an MOU?
Correct.
Yeah, do you want to answer that, Rebecca?
Hi, good morning. Rebecca Solomon, Associate Engineer with Department of Public Works, Transportation Division. We did have some communication with Roseville, and those improvements, specifically at Brady and Brady and Baseline, are not a part of their CIP, or ultimately not improvements that they are anticipating on completing. So at this time, that is really why it's significant and unavoidable, because no improvements are anticipated to be built at this time. They're not in support of doing that or having the development doing that.
All right. Another question. Why the variance? What's the justification? And if there is a variance, should we be looking at modifying the code of ordinances to allow everyone that same variance? So what's the reason for the variance?
I'll answer your second part first. Yes, we should be looking at modifying the zoning ordinance about coverage. We're seeing a lot of these developments with the smaller lots. 40% coverage on a single-story home on a 5,000 to 6,000 square foot lot doesn't give you a very, very big home. So they're looking to do a bigger home. A lot of the buyers do prefer the single-story for obvious reasons, but it's hard to put even an average-size home on a small lot. So we're seeing request after request after request for variances to our lot coverage maximums.
So is the county preparing a zoning code amendment to address that?
I believe it was in the early drafts of our zoning text amendment package, but it became so controversial that it dropped out. So we'd be looking at that as a standalone change to the zoning ordinance. But in the meantime, we're seeing this request come up quite often, especially in the higher density areas of where the new growth is happening in West Placer and even in Granite Bay.
So the recommendation of the staff is we should be doing this, and therefore until the zone code is amended, we will be looking at variances.
One by one.
If I can jump in just to add to that, I mean, we are working on the housing code amendments. Shauna Purvines was here a couple meetings ago talking about that process, where we are looking at different ways, and I believe coverage is one of them as far as increasing housing supply. So
all right,
that effort is underway, and we are doing an EIR on this project.
Yeah, I personally don't like variances, but if the county's on the pathway to make that a situation that is not a variance and resolving a situation now, then I think then it's worth it.
First, I have a question on page 3-6. Relates to the affordable housing. We've obviously had lots of discussions before this commission about the desire to see more affordable housing in Placer County and a mechanism to get that done. And my question is that there are 4 alternatives for this development to address the affordable housing. And the last one, D, still has the in lieu fee, which right now, as I understand, is not available to do until obviously sometime in the next year. The Board of Supervisors will be, I guess, coming up with a new plan for affordable housing related to kind of maybe an outside trust rather than those dollars coming into the county in an in lieu fee. So I guess my question is, why is it still there if currently it's not available? I know the wording says as determined by the Board of Supervisors, so maybe that kind of covers sort of what's going to happen in the future. So thoughts on that?
So the current county policy hasn't been changed, so it's build on or off-site or deed restrict off-site, paying in lieu fee or another measure. So until that changes, that those options are available to them. There is not an adopted amount for an in lieu fee, which is the board's been looking at for a little while now. Right. So we've left it in there as an option until the board policy changes, or if this project goes to the board and the board tells them which one of these they must do if they want this project approved. We just listed them as what's available to them today.
I am assuming that if we had a project today that was going before the board, that they would, if that was the desire of the developer, that they would and say that they would want to do the in lieu fee, then the board would have to come up with some sort of number for what that would be if that was acceptable. So I'm assuming that's what that's all about.
Yeah, we had that scenario with the White Hawk 1 project where the
Right.
applicant pushed for the in lieu fee. The board said, come back with a number that's acceptable to the planning division, and I don't think we've arrived at that number yet.
Yeah, I don't think they ever came back. Okay, I just wanted to ask that because that, again, that's a very important component to me to make sure that we're getting balanced housing. And I believe that some of this, there's a benefit factored in if there's secondary housing on a few lots. If I read that right, so that actually you could end up with more than the 119 on this. And I'm just trying to figure out how you get a secondary dwelling on these small lots.
It can be a small multi-generational unit where it's 400 or 500 square feet, a bedroom, a small kitchenette, and a little seating area.
Would it be detached or attached?
Internal to the main residence. Okay. Or they can come up with a plan where there's a separate entrance, a rentable unit. And to the applicant's credit, the proposed developer is looking at the potential of him developing those 6 lots with the 6 ADUs, keeping them for himself, and renting out those 12 units, deed restricted as affordable. So we're looking at a whole bunch of options, but they just haven't settled on what makes the most sense.
So what the developer would have is 12 rental units on 6 lots.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any other questions, Chris? All right, thank you. How many people are here to speak on this today? Okay. Just to go over how things go, we will have a timer on the microphone. As you see the yellow light go off, that's your kind of warning for your final minute to wrap up your thoughts and kind of make your points, I guess, if you would, please. I think Kara's getting the list.
All right, first 3 speakers, Craig Hodley, Bob Rates, and Kathy Fields.
You say Craig Hobday?
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry for that.
Good morning. My name is Craig Hobday. I have 2 homes on Vineyard Road, 2480 Vineyard Road, and I own the home at the corner of Eva and Vineyard. Hopefully you've all received the Dry Creek website with the 240 comments, most of which are against this development. There's really no need for a general plan amendment. Profitability of the project is going to be best at low-density housing. That's not a good enough reason for...
Mr. Hobday, I don't want to cut you short here and have you, but with a limited amount of time, the comments today are on the environmental impact report.
Then real quickly, what I can say is the EIR can't mitigate the traffic problem on Vineyard Road. And if this is all that we can discuss, then I guess that's all I can say. They can't mitigate the problem. They didn't mitigate it after Morgan Creek was put in, and it just won't handle the traffic. And I think that the alternative B, with just leaving the existing plan the way it is, I think we can probably all live with that. But other than that, and the only other question I have is why our supervisor has had to recuse herself from voting on this project, because I don't think we have any representation at the supervisor's level anymore. And I would like to know the reason for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kara, who's next, please?
Bob Rates.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Kathy Fields.
Please please come up to the microphone if you would, please, so it can get recorded for the record.
What Mr. Hogday has said, we've lived there for 26 years on the corner of Eva and Vineyard. And with the Morgan Creek that's come in and some other communities there, the traffic is getting too much for Vineyard to handle already. A lot of people cut through from Morgan Creek down Vineyard over to Foothills so they can go out to the freeway, Interstate 80 from there. They've built 2 schools in the area, so we have school traffic going through there. There are people that walk and bike along Vineyard Road. There is no shoulder. There is no sidewalk, no gutter. And if, I don't know, have any of you been down Vineyard Road and seen where we're talking about? All of you have? Okay, so then you're aware that there's a lot of wildlife out there. There's people coming and going on bikes and walking, and the Vineyard Road is an up and down road, and I just don't see that we'd be able to handle any more traffic there. As far as the roundabout at Brady and Vineyard, I assume you're going to have to take people's property in that area to put that roundabout in. There's a housing track on one corner, so I don't know how that can be impacted. And I just want to reiterate, you know, we've lived there for so long and we've seen the traffic increase and increase and increase. And I just, without some kind of mitigation that's approved and for sure, I don't see how we can handle it at this time. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Fields. Okay, the next 3, Tammy Reedman, Rick Reedman, and Barry Stillman.
My name is Rick Reedman. I live on Eva Lane, and that much density, like they've said, if you fully consider it, and then there's, I believe, like 40 houses currently between Brady Lane and Cucuriolo, and now we're talking about adding an additional, with all the extras, doing the math, 125 houses? You're doubling the population of that road that is already in distress. And the only way you're going to mitigate that issue is to take away people's property that are on that road. And I'm pretty sure all the people that live here don't want their property taken away. We can also talk about the proposed decomposed granite walkway there in front of. Anyone here ever try to push a wheelchair on decomposed granite? Doesn't work real well. The one that's on the track across the street that's in the county actually has barricades up on the ends of it, so you can't even get on the path. So traffic is the issue. Noise is the issue because there is a stop sign at Vineyard and Eva Lane. And every vehicle that stops and tries to get back up to 45 miles an hour in the first 200 yards, it severely impacts our neighborhood. I'm sure Craig can attest and Bob can attest to that noise as well. So I really want you to take into consideration the people that live there. What does this project do to improve our community? The only thing this project does is put money in a developer's pocket. It does not improve our community. There's a fence around it. We can't even get in it. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tammy Reedman.
He said what I.
Thank you.
Barry Stillman.
My name is Barry Stillman. I live on Tiny Lane, which is behind the fire station up off Cucuriolo. First comment is that the environmental impact report failed to mention the impact on another intersection. The 2 roundabouts on Vineyard and Brady and Vineyard and Cucuriolo, presumably that means there will be additional traffic on Vineyard and Cucuriolo, which means that many of those cars, especially if Brady and Baseline is not signalized, that traffic will have to come up to Cook Riolo to go to the signalized intersection of Cook Riolo and Baseline, which means there is significant traffic impact on northbound, and then the other time of the day, southbound Cook Riolo between Baseline and Vineyard, which has not been addressed by the EIR at all. The second comment I'd like to, and then this is really more of a question than a comment. I did not understand during the presentation, how can the existing community plan option, which would be, I think you said 60 homes, 30 homes on that in the project, how can that have no significant environmental difference to the 125 homes? I taught biology for 36 years. Trust me, 30 homes on that area versus 125 will have a huge difference in environmental impact. So if I could ask for that statement that it was determined that sticking to the original community plan will have no significant environmental difference from the proposal, so I don't understand that one at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next person is Chuck Barsdalo and Sonia Sorbo.
Hi, I'm Chuck Barzia. How you doing?
Well, Chuck.
Good. First of all, I bought my property out there in 1977 and built a home on it with my wife. And we've enjoyed a pretty kickback lifestyle. They built the housing development down the end of the street, and that picked the traffic up. The lane is marked double yellow lines from Vineyard Road east to Foothills Boulevard. People, by the time I have 4 houses in from Cook-Riola Road, by the time they hit my driveway, they're passing over a double yellow line. We had a highway patrolman parked on Eva Lane for a long time. He stopped one guy doing 93 miles an hour. So this is really a traffic issue. When I bought that property, the property zoned 2-acre minimum. Sometime in the 80s, when I was asleep apparently, it was rezoned to 1-acre minimum. Now we want to put 3 homes to the acre, or 3.5 homes to the acre. I did a little research in Placer County here, and I'm figuring a 3,000 square foot home, building permit for that is $22,000. And I'm looking at a home value of $500,000 at 1%. So that's a significant amount of money going into Placer County with the proposal showing right here.
Chuck, I want to make sure that we're keeping comments to the environmental
I
impact
understand
report.
that. I'll wrap this up in just a second.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, I'd appreciate your due diligence. I got 1 minute. And to stick with the build-out of existing community plan that exists now and has been in effect since the 80s. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it Sonia? Sonia?
All right. Thank you. Is there anyone else wanting to get up and address the commission? Seeing none, I guess we'll close this portion of the public comment. And I guess there's no action from the commission at this point. Anybody who wishes to submit comments that did not get an opportunity today or that may be watching this later on video, they can be made in writing by January 3rd, 2020, addressed to Shirley Harrington, Environmental Coordination Services here at the County Center, or by email. Thank you very much. You want to take 5 before we start this?
Thank you.
Fancy.
Supposed to come right on it, but.
How do you make it?
All right, if we're ready. No, I know. Can't start without Sue. Oh, okay. Can't start without EJ either.
Throw something at him.
Now we can start. Whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning, Commissioners and Chair Moss. My name is Angel Green. I am with the Planning Services Division, here today to provide an update on the Placer County Sustainability Plan. So the purpose of this meeting today, staff will provide an overview of the revisions that have been made to the draft sustainability plan. Also to recommend that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to adopt the Placer County Sustainability Plan based on the findings contained within your staff report. The Sustainability Plan, as we know, this is a county-initiated program. It essentially outlines various programs and policies that will be undertaken by both the community and the county in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to build resiliency against climate change impacts occurring here in Placer County. By way of background, this effort actually began back in 2010. The Placer County Board of Supervisors directed staff at that time to prepare a greenhouse gas emission inventory and strategy necessary to reduce emissions, but to look for opportunities where we can maximize energy and cost savings. And so at that time, the first greenhouse gas emission inventories were prepared. Funding to support the completion of that program actually did not come available until, I'm sorry, what is that?
Inviting somebody else into the meeting here? Or?
All right, sorry for that distraction. But in any event, so the funding to actually support completion of that plan did not come available until 2016. And it was at that time that the board directed staff to prepare the Placer County Sustainability Plan. And in 2017, a contract was awarded with our consultants, Placeworks, in order to update the greenhouse gas emission inventories and to prepare the remainder of the plan. Following the board's approval of the contract, staff worked together with the consultant team and kicked off the work program and began preparation of the sustainability plan. In January of 2018, the greenhouse gas emission inventory was completed, followed by the vulnerability assessment, which was completed in October of that year. Both the greenhouse gas emission inventories and the vulnerability assessment help to inform and shape the emission reduction strategies, which were then provided within the July 22nd draft sustainability plan. And that plan was made available for public review, as I mentioned, July 22nd, for a 45-day review period. So I'd like to introduce the sustainability plan working team. This team was critical to the development of this plan. It consists of planning staff from our long-range planning team, Crystal Jacobson, our long-range planning manager, and myself, along with the county's working group or technical advisory committee that we had formed early on in the process, which consists of expert staff working in various divisions and departments throughout the county who were able to assist with preparation of this plan. For our consulting team, I'd like to introduce PlaceWorks. We have Tammy Sill and Eli Crispy, who are here today, who are also available to answer any questions that I might not be able to cover fully. Also under contract with PlaceWorks, we have Fair and Peers, who have provided technical assistance on the emission inventories and forecasts as it relates to transportation and mobile emission reduction strategies. Last, Sierra Business Council has provided technical assistance with preparation of the county's first emission inventories back in 2010, but also provided assistance with updating our 2015 inventories. Sierra Business Council also assisted the county with obtaining funding necessary to complete those studies. I'd like to provide just a brief overview of the planning process that was used throughout this process to develop the sustainability plan. As I shared, we had preparation of the greenhouse gas emission inventory and vulnerability assessment, both prepared in 2018. Following that effort, staff kicked off the first series of meetings with our municipal advisory committees, as well as workshops for the public. And I'll go into more detail in those items here in just a second. That effort was followed by preparation of the forecasts and targets, and then on to the preparation of the draft studies. The draft sustainability plan, as I mentioned, that was completed July 22nd and was provided for public review. We then kicked off a second series of workshops and additional meetings with the municipal advisory committees. So it brings us here today for the Planning Commission deliberations, and soon being able to hopefully forward this proposal to the board also for deliberation. So the sustainability plan was developed with extensive public input over a 2.5-year period process. We first kicked off, as I shared, we had 2 series of meetings with our municipal advisory committees. We first met with the MACs beginning, throughout the process, but early enough in the process to be able to seek input. The first series of those meetings, which were held in 2018, included a presentation on the greenhouse gas emission inventory and the key findings from the vulnerability assessment. A second series of MAC meetings were held in the summer of 2019, where we were able to present the draft sustainability plan and the proposed strategies to receive feedback on those strategies. The 3 primary sources of public outreach that we initiated here included workshop events, a dedicated county webpage for this project, as well as a number of meetings with stakeholders and interested parties, as well as online engagement, including community surveys. In March and April of 2018, county staff and our consultants hosted the first series of workshops. That first series actually consisted of 3 workshops, one held in Kings Beach, one here in Auburn at this facility, as well as in Loomis. In August of 2019, we hosted the second series of workshops, consisting of 2 separate meetings, one in the Tahoe region and one here in Auburn. And then last, I'll mention we did have a workshop with our planning commissioners here in August as well. All right, and on to the meetings that we had with our stakeholder and interested parties groups. We actually began this process in early 2017. Staff reached out to various stakeholders to introduce the county's vision and goal to develop this plan and to provide an opportunity to identify issues early in the process. To date, staff has held more than 50 meetings with stakeholders, special districts, and interested parties. Staff has also worked with more than 400 interested parties, providing email announcements of workshops, meetings, and availability, sharing the availability of technical studies in the draft plan on our dedicated webpage. A full list of meetings with stakeholders, we do have that in Appendix B of the sustainability plan. And there's a list there of a number of those meetings that we held that I had mentioned. Quite a few there. Okay. For the availability of the what I'll refer to as the final draft document that's before you today, we did make a few public announcements on December 2nd. This project, or the plan, was posted on the county's Sustained Placer webpage, followed with an email announcement that went out on December 3rd, roughly about 10 days prior to this meeting, which was sent again to more than 400 interested parties and stakeholders. Information and links to share this information, again, was provided within that communication. We also have printed copies that are available both here at the Community Development Resource Center, but also in our planning office in Tahoe. So I'll go ahead and begin with the introduction of the sustainability plan. Much of this information you will have heard during my presentation during the workshop, but I would like to just provide a brief overview for the folks who might be in this room who did not have a chance to listen in on that presentation. So what is the sustainability plan? As I had previously mentioned, this is a comprehensive program that includes a number of actions and strategies that will be undertaken by both community members and the county in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. This sustainability plan is a strategic plan which includes a number of components. The first is the greenhouse gas emission inventory and forecast, which identifies the key sources of emissions that are occurring within the unincorporated areas for our community-wide sector, as well as county operations. It also allows us to use this information to set the foundation for development of the emission reduction strategies. The vulnerability assessment identifies people, infrastructure, buildings, economic drivers, and services that are most vulnerable to climate risk. And with this assessment, it allows us to identify appropriate strategies necessary to build resiliency here in Placer County. The plan does include both a greenhouse gas reduction and climate adaptation strategy, where you will find many of those strategies that we've prepared in order to reduce emissions and to build resiliency. And then last, we have the implementation program, which ensures successful completion of this plan. It will allow staff to prioritize the strategies in such a way to achieve the county's goals and policies within the general plan. It will also allow staff to monitor and track the progress of those strategies and perhaps to make note where changes might be necessary in a future update. It also will allow us to update the plan as necessary to continue to show the county's commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as necessary to show that we are complying with state regulatory requirements. With implementation of the sustainability plan, there are a number of co-benefits where implementation of these strategies, where we're likely to see additional benefits that will help us to achieve many of the county's goals and policies in the general plan. And we have a few listed here, and I won't go through each of them, but by way of example, conserving resources, improving livability, promoting cost savings, and supporting community resiliency. I'll briefly cover the regulatory environment as it relates to the greenhouse gas reduction strategy, the climate adaptation component, as well as our CEQA mandates. So we are aware that the state has a number of regulatory requirements aimed at reducing its emissions. In response to those regulatory requirements, the state's or rather the California Air Resources Board, prepared what's known as a scoping plan. And the scoping plan outlines the various programs that will be implemented by the state necessary to achieve the emission reductions pursuant to AB 32 and most recently with SB 32. The guidance that's provided within the scoping plan is used as the basis within the sustainability plan to establish appropriate targets and goals. For the climate adaptation component. This is an assessment that's actually required. Most recently in 2015, Senate Bill 379 requires jurisdictions to analyze climate risk and to incorporate adaptation strategies within their safety plans and part of their long-range planning efforts to reduce risks and impacts associated with climate risk. And so this plan certainly brings the county into conformance with that requirement. We also have CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act requirements that require us with SB 97 to analyze the emissions that would occur from the county taking action to approve discretionary projects. With these projects, we are required to prepare greenhouse gas emission inventories to make a determination on that significance of the project's ability or potential to emit emissions in excess of those thresholds, and then to identify mitigation measures necessary to reduce impacts. We had most recently in 2018 the addition of SB 1241, land use, where we had a new resource section that was added to the CEQA checklist that requires us to look at the impacts associated with approving development projects within high fire severity zones. Essentially, this plan does include a number of strategies that can be used to incorporate as mitigation as we analyze the impacts both from greenhouse gas emissions but also with wildfire. So I'll just briefly cover some key points from the greenhouse gas emission inventory. The inventories, as I shared, they allow us to identify the key sources of emissions that are occurring within various sectors. It allows us to identify the largest sector of emissions, which then allow us to identify appropriate mitigation strategies to reduce emissions. The inventories prepared for the sustainability plan include, for the community-wide sectors, those emissions, again, occurring only within the unincorporated portion of the county, as well as the county operations. Inventories were prepared for the years 2005 and 2015. And I wanted to share again, these inventories were prepared by our consultants with efforts with Sierra Business Council, PlaceWorks, Fair and Peers, also with county staff. These are the sectors, and I won't go through each of them, but again, just wanted to be able to show those sectors that we analyze in the community-wide sectors. This is following the protocols and best management practices consistent with the United States Community Protocol. It's been asked a few times since release of the draft, well, what emissions are not included within the inventory? And I believe this was a question that was asked previously during the workshops here with this commission. So I wanted to just address briefly, following the recommendations that we have within the protocols, emissions that would be outside of the county's jurisdiction or perhaps even authority to mitigate are not included within this inventory. First, we have airports, rail yards, wildfire often is a question as to whether those emissions are included in the inventory, and they are not. I've mentioned incorporated cities. Those emissions also are not included. But also, a lot of comments that we received raised questions as to why the inventory did not include the consumption of emissions that are occurring, and also taking into account the life cycle considerations of some of the material. And I wanted to share, although these emission sources are not included, a consumption-based analysis would include an estimate of the emissions that are created when we consume the goods and services that we buy every day. It may also consider where the products are being shipped from. This approach would account for emissions through a product's entire life cycle. This type of analysis has not yet been incorporated into the protocols that are typically used when preparing greenhouse gas emission inventories. The state scoping plan also does not include this level of analysis at this time. We understand that the scientific community is certainly taking a closer look at this. But in the event, if these emissions were included, either within the protocols, which would provide us guidance as to how we would calculate these emissions, and once the state has taken the necessary actions to update its own scoping plan with emissions from these sectors, we may consider then taking a closer look at these emissions as well. Also, I just wanted to mention, it often comes up the question as to how we treat the emissions from the traffic that's passing through Placer County on Interstate 80, by example. As explained in the staff report, you may have found that the emissions that are resulting from travel along the interstates, what's included in the inventory would be all of those trips that begin and end in Placer County, where we have a partial estimate of emissions that we've included would be maybe perhaps trips that start in Placer County, but they end outside of the county's jurisdiction. If we have a trip that begins in Sacramento, I use myself as an example because I do drive from Sacramento from home to get to work, only 50% of that trip ending in Placer County has been included within the emission inventory. All right, so here's a comparison of the inventories for 2005 and 2015. Overall, we saw a reduction in the community-wide emissions of 16%. The blue bar here indicates the 2005 levels, and the green bar represents the 2015 levels. And as previously noted, the largest source of emissions, it comes from our transportation sector. Second largest would be the residential energy. And you'll find that the majority of the strategies that we've included do focus on these two strategies. Sectors. All right, also included we have the emission forecast that shows the county's emissions that would occur in the future. And this would result, if no action was taken either at the local or the state level, we wanted to get an idea as to where we believe the county's emissions would be in future years. We're looking specifically at 2020, 2030, and 2050, which essentially allows us to determine as to whether or not we're aligning with state efforts and goals. We also have the county operations inventory. Again, I won't go into each of these, but again, this simply I just want to show that we are being consistent with the protocols and best management practices. And so we are including those inventory sectors as part of that protocol. Here's a summary of the emissions occurring within 2005 and 2015. We did actually see an increase in emissions. Some sectors we do actually see a decline, where with some of the sectors there's actually an increase in emissions. Some of the key findings, as we know, solid waste was found to be the largest source of emissions. And I'll just add that, simply when we look at the way that material breaks down in the landfill, even though we're actually seeing a reduction in the annual waste that's collected, cumulatively, when we look at how long that material stays in the landfill, when we take account for those emissions, we find actually that they continue to increase even with respect to a number of programs that the county is already implementing to reduce those emissions. All right, so for the reduction strategies, I just did want to bring up again, as I shared during the workshop, that the county is able to take credit for all of those actions that are underway right now with the state, and we've got quite a few. Any existing or planned actions in the future, we're able to take account for those within our inventory. We have few, just the Renewable Portfolio Standards, Title 24 Energy Efficiency Standards, which are updated quite regularly. We have the Clean Car Standards, as well as the low carbon fuel standards. I'll also just mention that we do have a few other new regulatory requirements. Mandatory commercial organics recycling, this regulation, also known as SB 1826, requires businesses generating certain levels of organic and solid waste to begin separating and recycling. That's an effort that the county is currently addressing right now, but yet to be quantified as to the resulting emission reductions that will come from that. We also have the short-lived climate pollutant reduction regulation known as SB 1383. This would require 50% reduction in the landfill organic waste by 2020 and a 75% reduction by 2025, as well as a 20% increase in recovery of currently disposed edible food. So again, the county is currently underway developing programs looking to see where the county needs to make adjustments in order to comply with its regulatory requirements. The county also has a number of its own local programs and current actions that are taking place right now that we'll be taking credit for within the sustainability plan. You may have noticed when you drove in today that we've got a little bit of construction in the parking lot. Half of that parking lot has been removed or temporarily removed as they install solar panels. So certainly this is just one. I notice am I on the right slide here? Just one of the efforts that we have underway to demonstrate the county's commitment to reducing emissions. We also have Pioneer Community Energy. Oh, I was on the right slide there. We have community energy efficiency retrofits, solar installations for our residents and businesses, as well as zero emission buses. So certainly the county has been making great strides on its own to reduce emissions, and with this plan we can demonstrate the county's continued commitment to reduce emissions. All right. So on to the strategies. So the sustainability plan includes 67 strategies to reduce emissions from our community-wide sector, as well as 45 strategies to reduce county operations. Collectively, these strategies will decrease emissions, putting the county on track to meet the regulatory emission reduction targets that we've identified. Measures were selected to best reflect the priorities and the values of Placer County. Emphasis on incentives and education were also considered during development of these strategies. I'm sure you've all by now had a chance to look at the list of strategies within the plan. I won't go into detail here, but with each strategy we are providing additional information to share not only the proposed strategy itself, but the potential emission reductions that would come from each of those strategies, the necessary actions that would need to be taken by county staff in order to implement those strategies. It indicates the implementation level as well as the co-benefits that can help support other county goals and policies. And here's just a list of those co-benefits that we've identified that will help to achieve a number of goals and policies in the general plan, that are associated with each of the strategies within the sustainability plan. Last, I just wanted to provide sort of a visual here that shows, looking at the forecast of emissions and taking into account then the reductions that we're likely to see as a result of implementation of the sustainability plan. We're able to look at specifically each sector to see where maybe perhaps more strategies might be necessary in the future to help us achieve the emission reduction targets that we've set out to achieve. Here is the progress that currently right now where we're able to actually calculate the emission reductions from the strategies that we're proposing. This green area here, you'll find the recommended targets that we've included. We have an absolute reduction target that we're trying to achieve, 1,224,770 metric tons. The scoping plan for 2030 and 2050 provide a recommendation of 6 metric tons per capita as well as 2 metric tons per capita. So essentially these are the targets that we're hoping to achieve with the sustainability plan and implementation of the strategies that we've included. You'll find that in fact we do achieve, and in fact the county has achieved the 2020 target here, reducing its emissions below the 1,224,000 absolute target. You'll also find that the sustainability plan sets us on a trajectory track to achieve the 2030 and 2050. Currently, right now, because we're not able to fully quantify the full benefit from the emission reduction strategies, we're able to show right now that we can get to 6.15, so slightly, not exactly meeting this recommendation of 6 metric tons.
And do you know what that number would be if we just followed state policies and new regulations and did not implement anything specific to Placer County?
We do, and I can get that number for you as to where we are without state. Yeah, I'll have our consultant see if we can pull that together.
Thank you.
We do not have at this time any regulatory requirements, at least at the state level, to meet the 2050 target. Again, here with 2020, we have AB 32, 2030, we have SB 32, but we expect in the near future that the state will be taking additional regulatory actions to move us closer to achieving the 2050 target. And I will get into a little bit more information, a little bit more detail into this here in one of my future slides. And I'll wait for Tammy to see if we can. Oh, did you find it? I'll move on until they
Please,
find that
yes.
section.
All right.
Question? Oh, you got it. All right, so for 2030, is that 2030 or 2020? Okay, so at 2030 with only meeting the state's regulatory requirements, we're at 7.7 metric tons.
And we go down, I lost slide, to 6 point something if we implement the county's plan.
Correct. Right now, based on the data that we have available, we do have a few strategies that do require some additional analysis and work in order to calculate full emission reduction potential. Currently, right now, again, the county has a we're providing a conservative analysis here. So at this time, based on what we can quantify, we're achieving we're getting to 6.15.
Thank you.
All right, so on to the vulnerability assessment. All right, so how do we define vulnerability? The California's Adaptation Planning Guide defines vulnerability as how much someone or something may be harmed by climate change. The vulnerability assessment prepared for the sustainability plan analyzed climate-related hazards likely or already occurring within Placer County and how these hazards are projected to change in coming years. It also analyzes how populations and assets may be most vulnerable to these impacts. And as I shared, these vulnerability assessments are required. SB 379 again requires that counties prepare these plans no later than January of 2022 or with the next update to the county's local hazard mitigation plan. So here are the hazards that the sustainability plan is analyzed necessary to identify appropriate adaptation strategies. We have 11 that are listed here. I won't go through all of them, but we've got, certainly agriculture and forest, pests. We have wildfire and drought, which certainly have already shown impacts here in Placer. The population and assets that were analyzed included 6 here: populations, buildings, economic assets, and various services as well. So I'll move on to the adaptation strategies. Again, we were, with this strategy, we're looking to improve resiliency to current hazards and adapt to long-term changes. The strategies were built on existing policies and programs such as the local hazard mitigation program. And in addition to the strategies that we've identified, this plan also identifies 10 goals for building resiliency with co-benefits for each of those, again, complementing and helping to achieve a number of the county's goals and policies within the general plan. And here are just a few of those examples of those strategies. I won't go into each of them, but just did want to point out that, for each of those climate risk areas. We are including adaptation strategies for each of those areas, wildfire, extreme heat, as an example. All right, so last we'll jump into the implementation program. All right, so in order to guide successful implementation and completion of the sustainability plan, we have a few implementation strategies that the plan is proposing necessary to help the county to reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and goals necessary to improve resiliency. Each of the implementation strategies are also accompanied by action items to help further explain the efforts necessary to conduct those measures efficiently. Once adopted, the sustainability plan would be considered a living document where periodic updates to the sustainability plan can be made to account for newer technology, programs, data, and policies at the state and local level. Future actions at the state and local levels will also provide additional emission reductions that would be necessary to bring the county's greenhouse gas emissions closer to those to the state's long-term emission reduction goals. And as I shared, there are a number of strategies again that will require some additional analysis once additional detail is known. And with an update to the sustainability plan, we could certainly take account and claim emission reductions for those efforts. So updates to the sustainability plan, I mentioned some of these state actions that we'll be able to account for. The ones that are occurring within the near future that I just did want to highlight, we have the California's Green Building Standards, also known as Cal Green. These are updated on a triannual basis, and we know that they're already preparing the new code for 2022. Transportation and land use, pursuant to Senate Bill 375, which aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by linking transportation funding to land use planning. We are expecting an update to the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, as well as the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency's Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategies. Those efforts are currently being updated to reflect a number of regulatory requirements for 2020. So we do expect potentially some additional reductions that can come from that effort. Also, the state scoping plan is updated every 5 years, so we could also take a closer look there. Also, within a future update to the plan, staff can consider for the Planning Commission, the board's consideration as to whether or not we want to entertain what's known as a qualified greenhouse gas reduction program. One of the main objectives that staff actually set out to achieve early in the process was to prepare a qualified plan. Under CEQA, CEQA allows for jurisdictions to prepare greenhouse gas reduction strategies that are required to meet a number of requirements. But with a qualified plan, you're able to streamline the future development of development projects, where you can streamline the greenhouse gas analysis and mitigation that's necessary under CEQA for those projects. Projects essentially would be able to implement the mitigation that we've identified within a qualified plan. Those development projects can essentially save time on the preparation of those studies. They can save money on the preparation, but it also can reduce the legal challenge that's often brought against development projects in regards to the greenhouse gas analysis and the level of mitigation that those projects are implementing. So certainly there can be some benefits to preparing a qualified plan. So we'll certainly, with an update in the future, take a closer look at that and bring that proposal forward, again, both to the Commission and to the Board for consideration. All right, so we'll move now on to the comments and the revisions that were made to the draft plan. Here I've highlighted just a few of the key issues and questions that were raised during public review. One of the questions that was asked, I'm going to start first with the questions that your commission asked during the workshop, if I may. So key issues and questions that were raised either by the public during that workshop, but then also by your commission. What sustainability plan requirements go above state requirements? As we've shared, the sustainability plan at this time does not include any mandates that go above state requirements. The plan does include a number of strategies that can be implemented during the environmental review process that would allow us to mitigate for both greenhouse gas emission impacts, but as well as reducing health and safety impacts that could occur from development within high fire severity zones. Each project, as those come in, would be reviewed on a project-by-project basis, and we would determine to the extent how those measures would be feasible, where they make the most sense, and how they could be implemented within each of the development projects coming forward. How will the I heard a question. Okay. How will the sustainability plan impact development costs and housing affordability? This was another question that we received during that workshop. Provided, again, that the sustainability plan does not include any mandates, staff does not believe that the implementation of this plan would impact development costs. We do believe, however, that the strategies that we're recommending, many of these strategies can actually help to reduce energy bills, which could then perhaps make affordable housing or for tenants who are living in affordable units to provide some adjustments there and some reductions in their energy bills.
Angel, you talk about these, many of these options being voluntary and not mandatory, but then as I read further, it kind of leads me to believe that as soon as any discretionary approval is asked for, that many of those voluntary items will become mandatory. And that will have a substantial effect on development and building costs.
Okay, yes. Thank you. And if I may, given those concerns that we did receive during public review, we actually made revisions to the plan to demonstrate that it's during the environmental review process where we will take a closer look at each of these strategies to determine the feasibility and the applicability as to where they are appropriate. You'll find revisions made to a number of those strategies where originally we had if they were implemented as mitigation, they would be required. But essentially we've modified that in a way that would first allow even non-discretionary projects to consider these actions shall the applicants want to continue to perhaps look at infrastructure that can help reduce their energy consumption. But, rather the implementation during the environmental review process, we look at each of these strategies individually, solar just being one of them. There are certainly some areas where solar might not make sense, maybe perhaps where we have an issue with trees and shading. So we do want to be certain and clear that it's during the environmental review process, we'll look at each of those strategies more carefully to see which ones would be feasible. I'll also share that this does follow the current practice right now when we're reviewing development projects. Many of the mitigation measures that you'll find will include language that will state to implement the following strategies to the extent feasible. And essentially we'll follow that same process that we're using. The benefit to listing some of these strategies now is that it gives more certainty to the development community as to what they could expect or just options that are available during the environmental review process. Quite often, consultants will call me and say, Angel, I'm just a few emissions over that threshold. What can you recommend we implement to get us below those thresholds? And so often we're pulling from various resources necessary to identify those mitigation strategies. So we have a benefit here to include that menu of options as it exists today based on information we have from Title 24 so that it gives developers a heads up as to what mitigation they might expect And it gives our consulting staff who are preparing these environmental documents the information that they need to complete their analysis.
I'd like to follow on Jeff's comment, but it goes more back to the first question. Most of the comments that I've read in here obviously seem frustrated because there weren't a lot of mandatory requirements in this, or at least their interpretation is that there was not mandatory requirements. But what I thought I heard you say in response to one is that there are no mandatory requirements beyond what the state is requiring us to do. So anything that's within whatever laws that were passed, whatever we're coming up to meet those requirements within the state law are mandatory. But anything above that, what you were just saying is that we're trying to give a heads up to these things that may be coming, but they're not mandatory at this point. Is that what we're saying?
That would actually be in addition to the recommended mitigation that I'm sharing with you. So there are additional strategies. Again, they could be used as mitigation, but yes, in response to one of those comments, we do know, for example, that we've got some state mandates coming up here in 2030 to require solar installation on non-residential buildings. And we wanted to provide an opportunity here to list that as a potential mitigation before 2030, before those regulatory requirements go into effect.
So likely whatever mandates do come down for Placer County development will probably be dictated by the state capitol. And we're just going to have to meet those requirements. It's basically a gun to our head. We've got to do it. I mean, obviously, is it a good thing for the environment? Yeah, it probably is. Is it practical? I think that's an open question. But I wanted to understand that because, again, there was a lot of comments related to, oh, you aren't making this mandatory. Well, yes, we are, as it applies to what the state requirements are. It is mandatory.
I will, I've got an item here to talk briefly about the mandatory versus the voluntary measures. And I will just clarify that at this time we're not, we did not make any revisions that would have changed the strategies here from voluntary to mandatory. We clarified that what could have been construed as mandatory, at this time they're recommended strategies for mitigation.
Okay, well, maybe you're going to address it later, but I'm just kind of curious how we can, if it's a state law that's requiring things to be done in a different way, how do we skirt around that without implementing it as a mandatory requirement? So it's mandatory. Well, and it is mandatory.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we've got mandatory requirements,
we'll somehow. I don't see how we can.
No, and certainly I would not recommend skirting around them. But certainly for this reason, the sustainability plan will need to be updated in the future to reflect future regulatory requirements. And during that time, as we are reviewing discretionary projects, we'll need to be careful to keep an eye on those regulatory requirements and to make sure that projects are complying appropriately.
I think one of the other things in that regard is this is a plan, and regulation mandatory features should be in the code and ordinances and in review, not in a plan. This is a plan to give us the flexibility to adjust to society and technology, economics as it comes along, and the plan does that quite well. But it really should be in the CEQA review and the codes and ordinances where the mandated regulations are applied. That's the appropriate place for those.
Okay. All right, so if there are no other questions, I'll move on to, let's see, question 3. How will the sustainability plan incorporate rice stubble into agriculture operations? So stubble, I actually had to look that up. Stubble is the remains after harvesting. So often we'll find straw and other material that's left on site. We've got to figure out what to do with that material. I'm aware that it was during the 90s, this material was often burned in order to get rid of it. So with a sustainability plan, we wanted to include a strategy that would promote a sustainable use for this material in place of burning. We did work very closely with our Agricultural Commissioner, Josh Huntsinger, on the development of Strategy AG1, which reads, work with local growers and farming groups to encourage the reuse of rice straw and other purposes as market conditions allow, such as animal bedding or erosion control, rather than burning the straw or reintegrating into the soil in advance of cultivation. So I did have a chance to do a little bit of research on available markets right now for this material. And recently I did come across some information on a potential new strategy where essentially you could take or convert the rice stubble into bioenergy or biogas. And so I did recently share this information with Josh. I've also have communicated with the California Rice Commission and UC Cooperative Extension Rice Advisor. This is fairly new information that I've come across, and so we will continue to have discussions to see if this might be a strategy that may work well here for Placer County. So I just wanted to share that additional information, and we'll continue to work with our Ag Commissioner during the implementation of this program to make sure that this measure is appropriate and continues to work for Placer County.
I was just going to say, my family used to be in the rice growing business, and I think they've been for some time now, since the burning of rice straw was not allowed, and as it was phasing out, they were looking for ways to get to use this, including fiberboard, using it as a feed product. I mean, they came up with a lot of different things that they tried to do with it. And a lot of it didn't work just because the economics of it didn't work. So that's the real challenge, is getting it out of the field and finding something that it's, has some substantial value to it to offset bringing it out of the field. So that's the challenge.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, so it brings me to the last question. What is considered a sustainable level of emissions per person? So I did a little bit of research here and had some discussions with our consulting staff as to what's sort of the consensus out there as to what's considered a sustainable level of emissions. So we can look at the recommendations that are provided within the state scoping plan. The current scoping plan essentially addresses the regulatory requirements pursuant to SB 32 to reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And in the scoping plan, it provides a recommendation to achieve 6 metric tons per person by 2030. And essentially, so in this plan, that is its recommendation. But certainly this is a short-term target. In fact, SB 32 is considered an interim target in addition to AB 32, which essentially looked at reducing the state's emissions to 2020 levels, or 1990 levels by 2020. Here with SB 32 and this goal to reduce emissions now further below those levels, essentially this is getting us closer to the state's overall goal to reduce emissions 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. The state does recognize that it is going to take quite a bit of time and effort to move towards that reduction goal. Certainly improvements will be necessary with technology. Also, with respect to the industries, we will need to provide time to allow those industries to acclimate and adjust as necessary, switching out equipment or what have you. So it's going to take us some time to get there. So I would just share that the 6 metric tons per person, this is rather a short-term goal here to get us closer to 2 metric tons by 2050. In the state scoping plan, they do explain that these targets would be critical in order to achieve a reduction in temperature. And I've got some notes on this. With these emission levels, it would allow the state to commit to limiting warming to at least 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels, which is derived from the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change reports and recommendations, but essentially necessary to get us back to that level before industrial times, where we saw a surge in emissions resulting from carbon dioxide as well as man-made activities. So, I do also want to just state that within the state scoping plan, we do have emission sources. When we look at it at a local level, there are sources that are not within our inventory. So as there are some jurisdictions that have taken that extra step to look more closely at their inventory, to look to tweeze out those parts of the state scoping plan that are either not applicable within their local jurisdiction, and they're actually finding that much more stringent metric ton per person thresholds are necessary to achieve those sustainable levels, sometimes in the range of 4 metric tons per person.
Angel, is there an or else from the state if we don't meet these? If 2030 comes around and we're not at 6, are we penalized somehow?
No. If your question is, if I can restate, if the county is not successful at achieving the 6 metric tons by 2030, is there a penalty for the county?
Correct.
No, there's no penalty at this time. With the state regulatory requirements, SB 32, for example, these are actions geared towards state agencies who have the authority and ability to mitigate, and so it's within the scoping plan that they demonstrate how they can achieve those emission reduction targets. We simply use that guidance that's provided in the scoping plan to set our own targets. But they do, certainly allow for flexibility. They allow local jurisdictions to establish their own thresholds as appropriate. Okay. There's, a lot of information. If you wanted to dig deeper into this, I would recommend maybe perhaps taking a closer look at NASA's webpage. They have quite a bit of information that kind of just explains in much more detail than I'm able to provide, just sort of the history, the understanding that we have amongst the scientific community, and the need to reduce emissions in order to achieve this temperature reduction, again, 2 degrees below those levels. All right. So moving on to the public comment that was received during the public review period. So again, the plan was released in July 22nd for a 45-day review period. Throughout the staff report, we refer to this draft as the August draft, so I hope that did not confuse you. But we did receive 66 comment letters on the draft document. There was one additional comment letter that did come in this week, and I believe you all did receive a copy of that. Appendix C of the staff report does contain a full list of the comment letters that were received. Feedback received during both the workshops and the meetings with stakeholders were also taken into consideration as we made revisions to the document. The staff and the consultant team, we did have a chance to review each of those comments to see where perhaps we may need to make revisions, either to the analysis or analyses that were done, the technical studies, or to the revisions themselves. And we did find that it was not necessary, based on the comment that we received, that any changes were necessary to the technical studies. But the comments did provide a lot of great recommendations and suggestions that we were able to use to better frame many of these strategies in such a way that will make much more sense for Placer County. Here are just a list of the key issues. Certainly, as Commissioner Nader had mentioned, voluntary versus mandatory strategies was certainly probably one of the largest concerns that were raised through probably more than 60 of the comment letters. Costs and feasibility of the strategies, transportation assumptions were also of concern, the CEQA requirements for a qualified plan, mitigation strategies for discretionary projects, achieving state targets, also concerns related to ecosystems, conservation, and sequestration. And I will provide, I've got just 2 slides here, I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the key points here and revisions that we had made or responded to within the staff report. Might add, you may actually, typically you would find a response to comments in a final EIR, and we don't have a final EIR here, so we do provide additional explanation within the staff report. So we'll start first with the CEQA requirements for a qualified plan. There was some confusion that the plan actually was prepared necessary to allow for the streamlining of future development projects. And I certainly do want to clarify, and we did make revisions necessary to make that more clear. And so you'll see there's additional discussion that's provided throughout the document, but primarily Chapter 1, to help clear up that confusion. At this time, this plan does not serve that function. Mitigation strategies for discretionary projects. Revisions, again, were made to each of these. We had actually included language that you would find within a mitigation strategy that would speak to, whether mitigation would be required. Again, this language was modified to demonstrate that really the intent here is to provide flexibility in the selection of those measures. And so a number of revisions were made to those strategies to encourage implementation of these mitigation strategies for our development projects that are seeking mitigation for greenhouse gas emissions as well as wildfire risk. For achieving state targets, modifications and additional information was provided throughout the document where applicable. Again, we wanted it to be clear. This plan does demonstrate that, in fact, the county has achieved the 2020 target. And based on the information that we have available today, where we can quantify emission reductions from strategies, we're on a trajectory moving towards the 2030 goal. All right, and finally, with the ecosystems, conservation and sequestration, we did have a number of revisions and clarification, as well as just additional discussion in the staff report to help sort of clarify and point to the adaptation strategies as well as the greenhouse gas reduction strategies that aim to address many of the questions and concerns that we had here related to this item. Last, we had other modifications that were made, some in response to the comments that we've received, also as well as some cleanup that we needed to make through typos and programs going away and that sort of thing. And I'm just going to briefly cover these real quick because I have an update to make to the staff report. Strategies T1, T1.4, and T2, those are our transportation measures. We did receive some great comment and feedback related to these strategies and information that we were providing on increasing the infrastructure for electric vehicles. Also adding renewable natural gas as an alternative fueling option for vehicles. So we did make those adjustments. For OR1, encouraging the use of biomethane for sustainable practice, also a good addition to that strategy. For government operations, AG2, to include native trees and plants to maximize carbon sequestration. So we certainly added that. Government operations, ED1, ED6 were expanded to maximize its use of wood from sustainable sources. WF11, we did modify this strategies rather significantly to entail and to include the ability to develop design standards which would allow for higher density residential in high fire severity zones on parcels that would be appropriate. And at the same time, while protecting public health and safety. As many of you are aware, in the Tahoe region, there is a high demand for high density and affordable housing. And given that the majority of the landscape there, most property falls within high fire severity zones. So we're wanting to take an approach here, and we work very closely with our CEO staff in Tahoe to draft this strategy. We wanted to take a different approach here where we're looking at developing design standards that will look very carefully at appropriate parcels where development of high density would be appropriate. Last, with Appendix E, modifications were made to provide full transparency of the calculation methods that were used to determine the emission reductions that were calculated as part of this plan. I will just mention, I just learned today in the staff report, I had mentioned that one of the other changes that was made was to Pioneer's Empower program, which we had believed during the revisions of this plan that plan, or program rather, would be dissolving. And it was shared with me today that Pioneer has actually placed that action on hold for right now. So we'll continue to follow those efforts, and any additional revisions that would be necessary would be prepared as part of an errata to this plan when we bring this plan forward to the board. All right, so that brings us to the recommendation. Staff, therefore, recommends the Planning Commission forward to the Board of Supervisors a recommendation to adopt this sustainability plan based on the following. Finding that the proposed action is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Section 15308, Actions by Regulatory Agencies for the Protection of the Environment, as well as Section 1836100, Class 8 of the Placer County Environmental Review Ordinance, and also to adopt a resolution approving the Placer County sustainability plan supported by the findings contained in the staff report and included in said resolution. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. I have a couple of questions, and I appreciate over the last week you and I have had some emails on hopefully trying to clarify some of this. And something that's come up since the last time you made a presentation to us is obviously these electrical outages that we've had and the rush to put in generators. There's a lot of, obviously in the unincorporated areas, propane is pretty common usage for whether it's heat or whatever, or cooking. But also that they're using those now for the generators. And my understanding is that when those systems are set up to do full power, once the power goes out, where there's an automatic switching system in it, those are also tested once a month. It goes on, those automatically turn on just to make sure that the system's working, and they run for about an hour and then shut back down and then go back onto the grid. And so if this is done a lot, I'm wondering, again, they're either using two power sources. They're going to use propane or they could use diesel. And this is obviously going to be an issue. I mean, it just kind of depends on how much it's used and how many people actually go out. But it could have some implications on this carbon issue. And so it's something new that's come up. I know that natural gas is also an option. If you have that, you could use that for it. But my understanding, obviously, is that natural gas and propane are two energy sources that the state wants us to get away from. There's municipalities that have already now said you can't use natural gas anymore. The city of Berkeley has said that. There's a few others. I assume there will be more in the future, that any new projects will not be able to use natural gas, that they're obviously pushing everybody towards all electric. And as the emails that I had with you, that to me, and this is a broader issue than it is just to Placer County, but I'm trying to figure out, well, we're still fairly heavily dependent on natural gas as a source of power generation for the state of California, how we're going to try to get away from natural gas and have even more dependency out in residential areas for electrical use, while we're taking away a source of electrical generation out there as well. So it seems like it's really compounding the problem. And again, that's just a broader issue than it is just Placer County. But yes, I'm still wrestling with how that's all going to work out in the future, whether there's wind and sun enough, because there's going to be so much pressure on the grid from more electrical use because of these other power sources, natural gas or wherever it may be, or propane, that will have to be more dependent on electrical. It's going to really put a lot of pressure on the grid. So
I'm just wrestling with this. I understand where they're trying to go, but I'm just wondering, how do you get there?
Yes. Definitely some good points to raise. Thank you, Commissioner Nader. And as I shared with you, we know that the state has some pretty aggressive goals. I shared with you in 2008 that state has established a net zero energy usage requirement for residential by 2020 with some goals for non-residential by 2030. There's a whole list as part of that effort. And so certainly we do want to be careful as to, where we encourage all electric development within our future development. And again, for that reason, we're not including any mandates to go all electric. And shall the state, move in that direction in the future, we'll certainly need to take a closer look at those areas within the county where we're going to need some additional resources. I like to share that we do actually have, and you may have actually reviewed these during your review, where we're recommending on-site solar or energy generation. Along with that is the encouragement to consider backup battery storage, which is a new trending. It's an ability where someone can, the electricity that they're generating from their solar panels, rather than sending that out to the grid, they can keep that there at their home and be able to use the energy from that backup source. So it's certainly an evolving technology right now that we're looking at, but we wanted to include that, but also, from a safety, a public health and safety concern, where, if I'm not mistaken, many of these jurisdictions that have placed bans on expansion of natural gas really are trying to address this public health safety issue. There could be sites within Placer County that could be appropriate. Let's say maybe if we have a development in a high fire severity zone, and maybe perhaps where expanding natural gas could actually be rather expensive. There could be scenarios where that would make sense. Again, we would analyze that on a project-by-project basis. And last, I'll just add that we do want to provide resources for our residents who are impacted by these power shutoffs. I know I've had my own personal, I've got family members that have been impacted by that, not being able to use their equipment, their breathing machines, and what have you, and that certainly is a concern here in the county. So we would hope that with development of these strategies that we can provide resources, whether it's a backup battery system that folks can use, but certainly looking to see where we can provide some more sustainable options for our community.
Right. I will add on that, the solar part and the power outages. I think a lot of people got a rude awakening who had solar and thought that when the power was out, okay, I've got power because I've got solar. Well, the majority of those people don't have the switching system that allows them to harvest that when their power's out, because PG&E doesn't want you to continue to generate power back into their lines that they might be working on. They're going to get a jolt from the power coming off your roof, unless you have that switch that throws it off to the grid when the power goes off. And the majority of people did not. And I see the head of the building department here. And I think it's critical. It's important that we communicate with people about implications out there. I mean, what you're trying to develop, we need to be able to hand them information that they need to be thinking through as they're implementing these, hopefully, energy useful methods. So.
Yes, thank you.
As I went through it, first of all, very comprehensive. It's an excellent document. And one thing I noted, though, is we've done a good job of inventorying the existing and available technology and strategies, but I don't see in here any policies for innovation. In encouraging innovation, either from the persons implementing projects who come up with things that would reduce below the 6 tons, or say competition between schools to come up with innovation and ways to reduce greenhouse gases in Placer County. So, maybe take a look at it and see if you think that's covered. But I felt we really do need our performance standard is we want to be below 6, and if you can do that, and if you can sequester carbon, then there's benefits. Might it be an award? It might be things like reduced processing times or queuing times. But I really do think people are quite innovative, and we need to encourage them to find innovation in Placer County.
Thank you. We'll definitely take a closer look at adding some additional strategies to help.
Interesting. It's a big horizon.
Mr. Cannon, you had
I was waiting for you to finish. Is that the extent of your?
Well, for better or for worse, I was one time appointed to as a director for Nevada Energy. And needless to say, they're not quite in the same position we are in this spectrum of issues. And it's interesting that maybe the whole world or a large percentage of it is going to benefit if there is benefits from what this whole process is founding that they can share in. But we're gonna be the billy goat, and who's going to initially pay the price of creating these better ways of skinning the cat. And I'm not opposed to that, except that I think it puts an undue financial burden on California, particularly, as opposed to Nevada and Colorado and others that don't have these kinds of mountains to climb to induce business and lifestyles and invent things and do things. I think we're going pretty fast, and it's kind of a concern to me. I'm not opposed to what the goal is, but I'm sometimes opposed to how we're getting there. And I think we need to. I wish we had a larger playing field rather than just ourselves as the creator of all these new inventives or incentives. While most of them are probably very good, some of them are going to be very painful, and and some of them aren't going to work. And unfortunately, we'll be the experimenters. That's my only concern. I think progress is great, but I think when you start forcing progress and making it happen, you sometimes get yourself in a little bit of trouble. You spend a lot of time and money, and sometimes it doesn't work. I hope they eventually slow down and allow these different systems to prove themselves on a little by little basis, and not just have every house in the state of California have to convert to some other kind of a system and find out it's not plausible and doesn't work. That just gets chaotic, and it's terrible to try to deal with it that way. And I frankly think the most logical way is to start with implementing some of these things in the housing market as we go, and have new houses be required to do some things as an experiment, more or less, because I don't think we have our hands on the issues just yet. It's just my personal opinion. I've tried a lot of new stuff because I think it's innovative. Not all of it's working. Thank you. Excuse me.
I agree with aspects of what what all of my colleagues have said today, and I think that you're to be commended for putting together such a voluminous amount of work that's going to be the boiler point for the county to follow. I like that there are applications in here that I see that in an overall goal to reduce greenhouse emissions, that we can greenhouse gases, we can look at congested areas where we have traffic problems, where traffic backs up, and EJ is going to know exactly where I'm going with this, in western Placer County, where Baseline Road has a multitude of stop signs in a very, very short span, and you can guess what happens to that road every single day.
during the peak periods of the morning and the evening. And it was something that I raised 21 years ago as a problem. And I'm not pointing this out as any criticism to anybody, but I just think that it is one way to demonstrate how the work that you and your team have done can be realized, and we can make savings in the future. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
I guess I got to pipe in here with a couple of things. I think it's no secret to anyone that I am not a team player when it comes to the fact that climate change is man-made. I won't argue the fact that the climate is changing, but I don't buy into the fact that it's caused by human activity, because climate change has been going on a lot longer than the activity we're blaming it on now. Realizing that this is kind of something that's a necessity, though, I'll get off of that soapbox and leave that one alone for now. What I am concerned about, as I perceive this, if all the greenhouse gas inventory in California is a swimming pool, then Placer County is probably just a drop. And we are taking great measures and going to, for lack of a better term, inflict a substantial amount of new regulation on the population of Placer County. And in the long run, the difference it's going to make on a statewide level, I don't believe will justify the expense and the program level increases in cost and processing in that's going to occur by implementing this. I also believe that the other issue the county will deal with is that the state is throwing new laws and regulations out so fast that unless you have somebody who probably on a full-time basis updates this to keep with that current legislation, it's going to be outdated before the ink's dry. And obviously, this was not an inexpensive document to produce and to distribute and to vent through the public and everything else, and it will definitely be even more expensive to implement. And I have concerns about the road we're going down and, and what it's going to achieve short of complying with the state regulation. I don't believe we're going to have any monumental effect on the air quality in the state based on what this does here in Placer County. We're just too small a piece of the puzzle. That's my 2 cents. I think if we're ready, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Who is here to speak on this? Caribbean, and I see one hand up in the back too. Okay.
Angel, thank you. Very good presentation.
Yes.
And the document is really, it's a monumental amount of work that's gone into it. So I can surely appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, hey, one more remark. In response to my colleague to my left, there are already jurisdictions in California that are doing a lot of this. And Roseville is one of the more preeminent cities that is doing that. And as a matter of fact, the entire western portion of the city limits, which are out off of Baseline and Fitiment, the West Plan in Roseville are two of the plans that I actually worked on as a planning commissioner before. And when I was a city planning commissioner, and those houses are all built with the latest and greatest of the green technologies that allow for substantial savings for those homeowners. In fact, they're the envy of many of the other residents because they're living in their efficiency standards are so much greater. So I just wanted to make that point, and because Larry made me think of that, and I think there are, like I said, just other jurisdictions that you can take a look at. And again, thanks for your hard work on all this.
Thank you.
Here, do you have the list?
I have the list. There's 2 names on it. First, Jean Piete and Jane Wurst, in that order.
My name is Jean Piette, and I did send a letter, and I'm not going to read it to you, but I just wanted to remind you that what I'm interested in is a very tiny little part of what's within the document, and it has to do with the community where Protect Rural Placer is very much interested in the wildfire risks and the concerns regarding the expansion of the Park and Trails master plan. And lo and behold, it comes up in this plan. And we do believe that it's improper. It is not being placed in a plan that has to do with greenhouse gases that are made by emissions from vehicles, because the area that we're talking about has very little. I mean, it's mostly dirt trails, as I had mentioned. And it just doesn't seem to be appropriate to have something like that in this document when it hasn't even been approved. I know this is going to take a while before it's ever implemented. I realize that. But it just seems as though they're going to extremes in order to get something approved when it's being opposed by other factors, by other factions. So I just wanted to remind you that my husband Jim and I live at 5395 Bell Road. 5345 Bell Road is where the access to the Hidden Falls Park is being pursued, and that's where our interest is. Because if you put a parking lot right next to us, you are going to have the heat factor that is emitted. You're going to have increase in vehicles. You're going to have increase in people. And that is going to cause pollution of all kinds. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Who's next, EJ?
Hi, my name is Jane Wurst. I'm a 45-year resident of North Auburn, my husband and I, and part of Protect Rural Placer. And I do want to refer directly to the sustainability plan, because I think it is really forward-thinking that the county is doing this and tackling this, and I do think it's absolutely critical that we look at how we're trying to preserve our environment and our quality of life. Each and every month, you as commissioners and our supervisors make decisions about zoning and about land use, and that's kind of where my concerns are. The decisions that are being made to shift zoning from ag or farm to commercial and heavy, high-dense residential is taking away all that open space that keeps our air clean and our quality of life high here in Placer County. Tuesday, I spent most of the day at the Domes to hear the whole presentation about the Sunset Area Plan. And, you know, a lot of things were brought up about its effect on the environment and on the climate and on the transportation. And they actually stated that that project over the next 10 to 20 years would put 900,000 new vehicles on the road in a single day. This is just one project that was approved. You're all aware of it. It was presented last week. You voted it through last week. This is just one of the mega projects that is coming down the pike here in Placer County. We have Bickford Ranch, we have Vineyards, we have Turkey Creek. How many hundreds of thousands of people can we add through these huge residential and commercial projects? How many more road trips can we add? How many park expansions with all those added trips on the road are we going to add? And will this plan, does this plan, how does it square up? I'm a layperson, and I read all this, I read this plan, and how does it square up that we can add this many people and this many vehicle trips to our county and still preserve and lower the greenhouse gases? So it's just a question, a concern that I have as a citizen here in Placer County. Thank you.
Who do we have next?
That is all on the list.
Okay, Mr. Garabedian, I think you raised your hand too.
Well, good morning. Mike Garabedian, talking for Placer County tomorrow. We really appreciate and admire really the hard work staff has done on this, including public involvement efforts and that continue. We're not commenting on the plan as a whole, but two aspects that we think are among, if not probably the two most serious unsustainable issues in this potentially. And the first one is the landfill. As you may know, and you've acted on, the landfill, the board yesterday and the planetary, I guess I only have a few minutes. I guess I'd better shorten this up. But anyway, they've approved reducing the buffer from a mile to, you know as much about it as I can say. And one of the supervisors said that, you know, it was just a brainstorm, unsupported idea. Well, the appellate court in this region in 2001, in that case, it was challenged by Placer Ranch Partners and other developers. The buffer was challenged, and the court upheld it under CEQA, but it also upheld it with this finding. They said the county had plenty of, I don't remember the exact technical legal language, but the county had the sufficient, the required burden of proof to justify that burden, justify that boundary, and now that is going to affect every single person in this county. That's why it's such a major issue. It has the threat. It's the threat to that landfill that can threat everybody, what everybody unwraps or puts in their garbage in their home, or people traveling through. Every business is going to be affected by this. If that shuts down, if that isn't allowed to expand, this is one of the most catastrophic potential costs and problems to address in the future. So anyway, that's one key issue. Now the other key issue, and this is important to address because the SACOG, new Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy was passed. They passed it quickly to meet a deadline. And then a few days into this month, the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency approved the Placer County Transportation Plan. And the number one, the worst problem that is by no means a drop in anybody's bucket is Placer Parkway. This is the 15-mile proposed $600 million parkway that would go from Whitney Ranch interchange up there below Lincoln over to Highway 99. Now they aren't pointing out to you that this is going to be a cross-country, a cross-continent link for all the truck traffic that's going to go over to 99 and so forth, and it's going to go right through going to make that right through our community. So, that problem reflects on you too. It reflects on you. It reflects on the burden is really on the public and on the developers because the county is letting them get away with old-fashioned ideas that are just totally outdated. So the public is going to have to look at the new technical very accessible ways of making studies to see how development can be made in the most sustainable manner. And that's the issue on both of these two issues. How can it be done sustainably? And the county and the supervisors are out to lunch and failing to do their job, living way, way, way in the past. We need to adapt. And I think, from some comments here, there's recognition that we need to adapt. So,
Mr. Garabedian, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Because I'm a little bit puzzled here. I think the sustainability plan is being proposed to go to the Board of Supervisors, and it does come up with several strategies that help the county to deal with some of the problems you're talking about. So are you talking about the sustainability plan, or are you just talking about supervisors and their quality of work and that kind of stuff and ours?
I'm talking about the sustainability plan.
Is it okay or is it not okay? What do you think?
Well, there are a lot of good things in the plan, but the county is doing things to cancel it out totally. And if we lose our landfill, if the county spends its part of $600 billion Parkway, that is a greenhouse gas emission, vehicle mile traveled, waste of time. It's not going to relieve congestion.
Yeah, I guess where I'm puzzling is, the sustainability plan does deal with the landfill, and it does deal with traffic. And so, at any rate, it's dealing with the issues you're talking about, in my view. So, I guess I'm a little bit puzzled what your bottom line point is really.
You can have lots of great policies, but look at the actions. Look at the actions that are undermining, threatening the landfill, and the county's. Well, the first battle place, the county has acted to put Measure M back on the ballot in the presidential election next year. 1.3 million in that case, asking the voters of Roseville, that is to build Placer Parkway.
You're way beyond what the topic is here today. I think we're talking about the sustainability plan. And we're talking about Placer Parkway and traffic and other subdivisions that have been approved. And that's not what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with sustainability plan.
Well,
okay, so if you like it or you don't like it, that's what we need to hear about.
It's not enough, but it's being ignored. I'm saying that the planning, the projects that are being approved, these two things we're talking about are being.
What do you want the planning commission to do today? Approve the plan or not approve the plan?
There's a lot more work that has to be done on this plan. So we're not commenting on it. We're commenting on two things that would undermine it severely. And if you don't, if
you think there's a possibility for amendments to happen to the plan as we go through time?
I hope so. Hope every year that there could be, if not a new board of supervisors, or somehow you being assigned to tackle how to bring modern planning into what you're doing when you're evaluating subdivisions and so forth.
Well, I think the plan really talks about that we're dealing with today. And, it may not be complete enough for you, but at any rate, I guess the question is, what do you want us to do?
I think that's right. It's not complete enough.
You want us to prove it or not approve it?
Pardon me?
You don't want us to prove it?
We're not commenting on it.
Huh?
We're not commenting on it.
So we're here to get comments on the plan. I realized that by answering some questions that even though the time was up before questions started to get an answer, can we wrap up your thoughts in just a minute or two here, Mr. Garabedian?
I did wrap up my thoughts just a minute ago because the problem is the county is undertaking extremely unsustainable efforts. And if you aren't concerned about the sustainability of the landfill and they're taking that kind of action, it's not being addressed in the plan. It's not being, the transportation, the reliance on expanding roads to address, I'll try to sum this up quickly, address congestion is not going to happen. As we all know, when there's opening on that highway, we go on there because we know when it's on there and when it's not on there. 20% of the people are not using them now, ready to go right back on. All the new development coming is not going to be served by additional lanes. It's just going to bring more traffic. So, so the principles of those sustainable issues really aren't being addressed.
Thank you.
And we need to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't think we want to get replies and things. If everybody's had a chance to speak that wants to speak once, I think that's where we're going to call it quits. Your objection is noted. Thank you. I think that barring council telling me that we have to continue to let people speak again and again, we'll close it.
Everybody who is signed up to speak and who has spoken at this point, and so at that point it's appropriate to close the public comment period
right.
if we've heard from all the members of the public that are here to speak on it.
Very good. So with that advice from legal counsel, we will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
A question before making a motion here. Do you feel the innovation measure is in the existing plan, or should that be added to adopt a resolution approving to add in a measure that would encourage innovation?
Yes, you can make a recommendation for approval, adding additional strategies that would promote innovation.
Would that be a strategy then? Okay.
That would be, yes, correct.
Then I would make a motion.
Or, I'm sorry, a conditional approval.
I make a motion that the Planning Commission recommends to the Board of Supervisors that the proposed action is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15308 and section 1836-100 of the Placer County Environmental Review Ordinance. And do you want these in 2 or 1?
2 separate actions, please.
Okay.
Okay, second.
Oh, we've got 2
There we
separate.
go, all kind of seconds.
So we have a motion and a second.
Okay. I got a first from Mr. Nader and a second from Mr. Johnson. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And a vote from Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison? Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Thank you.
I make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they approve the Placer County Sustainability Plan supported by the findings contained in the staff report and included in said resolution, and that the Planning Commission recommends the addition of a implementation measure that encourages innovation in the reduction of greenhouse gas.
Motion.
Second.
Do we have a motion and a second?
Second.
Second. Commissioner John?
Okay. I have a motion by Mr. Hauge and a second by Mr. Johnson. A vote from Mr. Cannon, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison? Mr. Moss?
No.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I think we could probably use 5, or do we want to just dive right in? Let's keep going then. All right.
Deep Bridges. It must be 11:30. It says
we got to be right on time.
Let's see, that would be Hawaiian time.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Bennett Smith, with the Planning Services Division. Our next item today is a request from Mr. Steve Taylor for a subdivision modification that would adjust the southern wetland preservation easement mapped on Lot 43 of the Cambridge Estates subdivision from the existing 18,530 square feet to 13,345 square feet, which is a total reduction of 5,185 square feet. The request includes an analysis from the biologist. The subject parcel is a 2.4 acre undeveloped parcel that is located at 8350 Rustic Woods Way in Loomis. The parcel is zoned residential agriculture, combining minimum building site of 100,000 square feet. The Cambridge Estates subdivision, permit number SUB 401, was originally approved in 2002 as a 65-lot residential development on a 184-acre parcel. Lot 43 is located on the east side of the subdivision. I have it on here, so this is lot 43. The proposed modification request is for the wetlands preservation easement located on the southwest area of the parcel. The wetland preservation area was designated during the original approval process and requires post and cable to be at the limits of each of these areas. The easements were dedicated to the Cambridge Estates Homeowners Association, of which its board agreed to this modification pending final approval from the county. The modification area is graphically represented in blue. This area would be reduced in size to accommodate the grading of the site for the proposed single-family dwelling, which would be located centrally in the building envelope, as you can see with the dashed line. Staff visited the site on November 8th, 2019. These are the photographs. So the photograph on the left is facing east. So this is the area proposed to be modified, to be removed. And the picture on the right is facing west. So this is the area that will remain. Just due to the sun, there's a bit of a different color, just the phone camera adjusting for the sun. So the grass would be the same color. It's not that big of a difference.
Purple grass.
Yeah.
Right.
So the subdivision modification request was based on the results of a biological analysis performed by Peter Balford, a biologist with eCorp Consulting. The study determined that no wetland habitat existed in the 5,185 square foot area proposed to be removed from the easement. The area contains upland vegetation and well-drained soils that would not be rated as hydric. Peter is available today for any additional questions. So next is the proposed site plan. This is Mr. Steve Taylor's proposed residence. The single-family dwelling is proposed to be located centrally on the parcel. The site grading on the south side of the site is located on the area that the wetland preservation easement is proposed to be removed. So the particular wetland area as it's mapped today, they just need grading to get to the finished floor elevation of the house. So the house will not be, as is proposed, in the wetland. It's just grading, and it'll be back to however his yard looks like, whether it's lawn or open space or landscaping. With the approval of the modification request, the property owner will be able to construct the residence as shown. So just to point it out, this is the wetland area here, and so this house will be just right beside it. So therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission find the project as categorically exempt from CEQA Section 15305, minor alterations to land use limitations, in that the abandonment of a portion of the wetland protection easement will not, in the result of the creation of new parcel or changes to land use or density, and approve the request for a subdivision modification to allow for the abandonment of the portion of the wetland protection easement located along the southern property line on Lot 43 of the Cambridge Estates subdivision, subject to the findings and recommendations of the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. I am available for any questions.
A question: what happened to that property once it was? I mean, it was approved, and obviously somebody felt that those were wetlands. What has changed?
So with the original development of the subdivision, they encased some irrigation drainage ways, And so during the new stages of the subdivision, there was a leak from these drainage canals, and it was found out, and they fixed the leak. And so the leak had made the wetlands at a higher elevation to be more unnatural water there than originally. And so when they sealed up the leaky lines, the level dropped on the wetland habitat, where the water would be to create the wetland habitat.
You see this this easement from the map looks like it goes through some other parcels further down.
Correct. There are several parcels in this subdivision that have these wetland preservation easements. The wetland body kind of encompasses the parcel as it originally stood. So when they divided it out, some parcels had wetlands that need to be preserved through the approval process. So there are maybe 20 or so lots.
I guess what the question is this going to be a domino effect on the other with the other parcels coming forward too?
So just with such a small size, we're not expecting it to set precedent. So the size being removed is less than 5% of the parcel. So it's just a very small, these are large lots, so it's just a very small area that's being requested to be removed based on the biological study.
And I guess some of the other parcels are already developed or not? I don't
know. So I believe it was 47 out of the 65 are developed. So there's roughly 20 in this subdivision that are undeveloped.
But as far as this easement, the easement goes, the drainage easement, are those parcels still waiting to build, or are they built out?
So I remember I was looking at the ones that were not developed, and they're more on the north side of the, I'll go back to the subdivision map. So these parcels are basically built out. I think there might be one in here. It's these back here that are undeveloped now. And so this is the wetlands mapped on the original subdivision maps. So the homes near this are already developed. It's just the houses in the back there's lots in the back that are undeveloped at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm the general contractor. Taylor Steve Evans for construction. He lives in LA and was apologies. Hi, I'm Steve Evans, Neighborhood Construction, and I'm the builder for Mr. Taylor, the proposed builder. He lives in Los Angeles and was not able to make the meeting today. So I believe this is Peter, and we were here to answer any questions you might have.
Unless there's any other discussion, I'm glad to go ahead and make a motion. I'd like to move that we approve that the project is categorically exempt from the environmental review pursuant to provisions of Section 15305 of the California Environmental Quality Guidelines and Section 18.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Nader, really quickly, I didn't have on record that we opened for public comment.
Oh, yes.
Just to keep everyone honest.
There was nobody in the room. So.
Is there anybody from the public who would like to take comments on? Seeing none, we will close the public comment. Thank you again for keeping me out of trouble.
Thank you, and pardon the interruption.
I was trying. Now we will go on.
All right, can I continue from where I was, or do I have to restart?
I think you can continue from where
you
were at. I think we all are remembering.
Okay. I think I ended at the Environmental Review Ordinance Class 5A1, minor alterations in land use limitations, in that the abandonment of a portion of the wetland protection easement will not result in the creation of a new parcel or changes to the land use and density. Anything else I need to add to that? And we're doing those as separate ones.
You have a motion?
I want to just clarify, this is a commission action. It's not going to,
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please, Sue.
I have a first from Mr. Nader, a second from Mr. Johnson. So a vote from Mr. Cannon, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Thank you.
Would further move that we approve the request for a subdivision map modification PLN 19-00308 to allow the abandonment of a portion of the wetland protection easement located along the southern property line on Lot 43 of Cambridge Estate subdivision, subject to the findings and recommendation conditions of approval found in the staff report. Okay.
Second.
Motion and a second.
I have a first from Mr. Nader, a second from Mr. Johnson. A vote from Mr. Cannon, please.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we're all through, all done. Thanks you to everybody for your participation in today's meeting. And meeting adjourned.
What do we do now?